The next class of submarines started by the Japanese were the four boats of the 3,603 surfaced and 4,762 submerged ton I-13 class, sometimes known as the Kaikotaka AM type, or just AM type, which were built between February 1943 and March 1945. Originally, these were to have been follow-ons to the I-12, which was a follow-on to the I-9s, which were a follow-on to the I-7s, which you get the idea. Originally to have been long-range command boats, when the I-400s proved too slow to build, they were recast as smaller-ish versions that could be built faster with a shorter range, though still very long. Economy I-400s. Maybe we'll just table that East Coast thing and be content with the West Coast, if you will. As part of the redesign, and in light of their new role, they lost the flag facilities and their hangar was enlarged to carry 2 float planes, along with being bulged to maintain stability. While they lacked the I-400's unique double hull like the I-400's, the hangar was offset, which made keeping them running straight tricky. Shortly after completion, the first 2 were fitted with German-inspired snorkels. Also, like the I-400's, by the time they entered service, it was way too late to take the fight to the continental U.S., so along with the I-400's, they were tasked with raiding the main forward U.S. harbor at Ulithi. But the war ended before the attack could actually occur. Not that it had much chance of success. The second 2 were never completed. Also, like the I-400's, as the idea of air raid carriers lost practicality, they also were converted into tanker submarines while under construction, meant to bring fuel from the East Indies to Japan. But again, they were never completed. I-13 was started February 4th, 1943, and completed December 16th, 1944. I-14 was started May 18th, 1943, and completed March 14th, 1945. I-15 was started April 30th, 1943, but not completed. I-1 was started June 24th, 1943, but not completed. Main armament was 6-bow 533mm tubes for 12 torpedoes. A single open 140mm deck gun was mounted after the sale. Propulsion on the surface was provided by 2 diesel engines, which produced 4,400 horsepower that ran the 2 propellers and recharged the batteries for a service speed of 16 knots. While submerged, they used their batteries to power 2 motors, which produced 600 horsepower for a top speed of 5 knots. Range on the surface was 21,000 nautical miles at 16 knots, and submerged they could do 60 nautical miles for 3 knots. Test diving depth was 100 meters. Built into the forward part of the conning tower was a hangar for 2 float planes with a catapult on the deck in front of it. In May 1945, I-13 and I-14 were fitted with snorkels. I-13 was at Kure still doing post-commissioning training on March 19, 1945, when Task Force 58 raided the harbor. Fortunately, she was able to dive and avoid being damaged. On July 11th, she finally left Japan to take part in the planned attack on the American port at Ulithi. East of Yokosuka, on the morning of July 16, 1945, she was spotted by an aircraft from the experienced escort carrier Anzio, which tracked her with sonar buoys and attacked with depth bombs and Fido homing torpedoes, forcing her down and damaging her. Later that day, more aircraft from Anzio and the veteran destroyer escort Lawrence C. Taylor took up the chase and finished her off with more depth charges, more Fido, and Hedgehog. I-14 was at Kure still doing post-commissioning work up on March 19, 1945, when Task Force 58 raided the harbor. Fortunately, she wasn't damaged, though. On July 17th, after repairing a defective bearing, she left port to take part in the planned attack on the American port at Ulithi and headed for Truk, arriving in early August. She was still there when the war ended and returned to Japan. Post-war, she was studied by the U.S. and scuttled off Barbers Point, Hawaii,